Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad that you found your way here. I hope you click like, subscribe, and share. But even if you don't, I hope that you benefit from the information that is coming up in the next hour or so that I'll be talking and speaking with Selma Khan. Selma has been amazing in my recovery, in my help. I've really been impressed, honestly been impressed by how she conducts her work, the ethical standards she works with. And so I invited her here on my channel. And Selma, I'm super happy that you decided to say yes. And welcome. And I'm so excited to be speaking with you on this topic of all topics, I think, which is healing mind, emotions, and soul. So
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity. I'm so happy to be here.
Yay. Selma, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Like, what exactly do you do? What kind of healing work do you do? And how did you get into it? How did you find it? And what
Yeah,
motivated you?
absolutely. I mean, my own journey is that I have suffered from trauma like so many others, and with narcissistic parents specifically. That kind of led me to the diagnosis of PTSD, kind of late into my life, but I really wanted to find a way to heal from PTSD and all the symptoms that it included. So I sought therapy, like so many others, and I found my way to talk therapy, which is kind of the traditional way that everybody gets help. But the problem was that it didn't really help me much. Talking about the traumas and the pain, it kind of just made me feel worse. And it also made parts of me feel like, oh, see, there's nothing that can kind of help me. And maybe it is something that's wrong with me, because even a therapist doesn't seem to be able to help me. So, but still, I had this longing inside that there must be some other answer. There must be some other way that we can heal this, because people aren't supposed to just suffer like this for the rest of their life. That just seems so unfair. So, destiny kind of played a part here. I met a woman who also had PTSD at the time, and she recommended me this book called "The Body Keeps the Score." And it is literally one of the best books ever written on the topic of trauma, I would say, both for clinicians and for the layperson, actually. And I find that so many of my own clients, and just, trauma survivors in general, find that book so powerful. So once I read that book, that's where I heard about the trauma therapies that are completely different from talk therapies. And I heard about internal family systems therapy, which is what I'm trained in today. I also found out about EMDR, which is also a very powerful evidence based treatment for trauma. Also heard of sensory motor psychotherapy, which is also what I'm trained in today. And but at the time I was just so fascinated because I was like, wow, what are these treatments? They sound absolutely incredible. And the results that he spoke of in the book, of the PTSD symptoms in clients just reducing so significantly, lower anxiety, lower depression kind of even disappearing many times. That really drew me to these treatments. And so I got very curious, and I read pretty much every book on the planet regarding internal family systems therapy specifically. And I was just amazed. And I thought, wow, I need to try this therapy. So I found an IFS therapist, and we worked online together. And I was just amazed to see the changes in myself, because I came from a place where I had no self confidence. I didn't believe in myself whatsoever. I had no ambitions. I thought, who am I to have ambitions? Right. And my anxiety was off the roof, nightmares, you name it. I had it all. And I was just thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, and how will I ever do anything worthwhile. So I was at that stage, and then doing this healing work, finding, that there is a place inside all of us called self, and we have that inner confidence, we have that inner courage, we have so much of inner wisdom if we only get some help to access it, right? And then the talk therapy, it didn't really work for me, and a lot of people feel the same way, but trauma therapy actually helps you to do that. And yeah, I guess that's the short version of the story of how
Awesome,
I
awesome.
found
Who
IFS and
who is that
sensory
book
model.
by? Do you remember?
Sorry, yes, it's written by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk
Okay.
is his name.
I'll
Yeah,
post the, link in the description box. I'll also put the link to
absolutely.
your information and
Absolutely. And
yeah.
also if people just Google The Body Keeps the Score,
Mhm.
it's gonna come up. It's a very famous book. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I find your work so important because in my work, what I've encountered with myself, but also with others, is that there's a lot of healing that has to happen first before the higher levels of spirituality are opened and they're accessible, right? Because coming from an unbalanced emotional or mental standpoint can lead one into unbalanced spiritual standpoints. It's just the way it is. And so, if we want to manifest something, for example, the old manifestation work, a part of that to make that happen and come about is healing the mind body spirit system first, so that what you want to manifest is in alignment with who you actually truly are, as you mentioned, the self.
Yes.
And that your desires and dreams are actually coming from a healed perspective and not from this unbalanced child perspective, manifesting and creating or trying to create all this stuff that doesn't ultimately work out or is not meant for one, right? So I find your work super important from that perspective, aside
Yes.
from the point of for healing's sake,
Yes.
because all of us are co-creating this world that we live in, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
it's like, what are we all together manifesting here, you know?
100%.
And so it's really important to me that yeah, you do what you do, keep going. How do you explain the different methods that you use to treat trauma? Do you work with different methods?
Yeah.
And if you do, what approach is best for a particular client? Like, how do you determine that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, like my therapist and I, we say the same thing, kind of, because she's a sensory motor psychotherapist too, just like me. But she always says the same thing, that IFS just makes so much sense. It just makes sense. And the reason for that is because if we look at what IFS stand for, it's internal family systems. So it basically means that we all have an internal family of parts inside our head, and you have your all these feelings that you have, thoughts that you have, they are actually parts of you. And so you can actually go inside and speak to these different parts, the part that feels angry, perhaps a part that feels sad, a part that has anxiety, a part that has depression. And when you show curiosity an openness toward these parts and say, I am curious. Why are you angry? Why are you sad? Why are you feeling anxious? You actually get answers from these parts because they are real beings inside us. And so this is evidence based, right? So I
Wow.
think this is why it's so powerful for people, because if we look at songs that we hear, a part of me loves you, a part of me hates you, right? Like we hear the language of part everywhere around us, even in movies and series, like everything. And I think it's because it just makes sense to people. It's just not something that we have really found a language to, but IFS therapy actually brings you a language and a method to talk to these parts rather than just speak from the parts and, like, I'm so anxious, I'm so pissed off today. So we're like, let's get curious about the part of you that's pissed off and ask it to kind of separate from you so you don't have to feel all its feelings. And that kind of shifts everything. And so I think that's why so many people just they just feel so it's so easy to get into IFS, because nobody kind of denies, or not many people at least deny, that they have parts, because they kind of talk to me in that way, like, oh, yeah, part of me kind of is angry about that, or a part of me is frustrated about that. So yeah, I guess if that answers the question.
Yeah,
actually.
yeah. And as you mentioned that we have all these different parts and within us that are active at any given time, it made me think of those parts of us that are self-sabotaging, those parts of us that get in our way of creating what we want to create. And
Yes.
you giving an like your method, the way you work, giving an opportunity to help that, move along.
Yes.
So that opens the doors again for other
Yes.
experiences in life.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this, that creativity, for example. So all of this stuff that everyone wants more of, right? We want more of calm and peace, and we want to be creative, we want to be confident. All of this stuff is something that we have access to, but it just gets blocked because of trauma.
Mhm.
So if you've been told your whole life by parents or society, don't be like that, stop being like this, don't be this way, you have too much attitude, you need to be a good girl, you need to, stop being sad. These things make us disown those parts of ourselves that are maybe confident. So maybe you question your parents a lot and say, but why is it that way? Or I don't think that's fair, and then you might get slapped for it, or you might get shamed for it. And so that part, what happens to that part? Well, it gets exiled, right? It has to kind of get hidden in a way, in the depths of our minds. And that's why we call these parts exile parts, because they have literally been exiled. And so when we disown parts of ourselves, we are alienating our ourselves, essentially. And this self alienation is what creates problems in our lives.
Mhm.
That's where the self sabotaging comes in, people pleasing comes in, overworking, overachieving, because these parts are still operating from what worked in the past. In the
Mhm.
family, it was great to do people pleasing. It was great to be an overachiever because it gave you maybe some attention from mom or dad, or, they saw you in the way that they wanted to see you. But then when you get out of the family system, these parts are still doing those roles in our lives. That might not be working so well for us now when mom and dad are not here anymore. And so that's the work we want to offer in IFS therapy. Let's talk to these parts and say, hey, did you know that you're not living with mom and dad anymore? They're not here. So maybe you don't have to do this role anymore. Would you like to do something else? Maybe you like to relax a little bit for once. And these parts usually feel really relieved, like, oh, really? I don't have to be a people pleaser anymore? That sounds kind of nice. If that makes sense.
Yes. And that also makes me think of how we recreate our family structures around us. We choose the same people because those parts are still in control.
100%.
And so they recreate this entire environment and we wonder why we can't move ahead.
100%. I mean, that's what trauma does to us, right? Because we've been in an environment, we've been told certain things. You are like this, you are like that, and you're not enough, whatever the message has been. And that creates beliefs in us. And then we go out in the world and then we look and find people, environments, work environments that mirror that reality that we were told from our parents. If the essential message was, you're never going to be enough and you're not going to achieve anything in this world, well, we're going to find people who are going to tell us that exact same thing, or who are going to treat us in the exact same way. You're not good enough, you're not going to achieve anything in life. But so that's why we have to heal the parts in us first who feel like they're not good enough, who feel like I can't achieve anything in this world. Once you do that, the whole system inside you shifts. And then when you see someone says you're not good enough, you're going to be like, that's not true. Right? Like that has nothing to do with me. That's your stuff.
Mhm.
I know who I am now because I have healed that part of me. And so you're not going to be drawn to that. It's not going to be attractive to you anymore, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you deal with people that are resistant though, that are stubborn
Mhm.
to and that sounds so negative. Like, yes, the negative ones that are resistant and stubborn, but also the ones that can't access. It's like you're trying to get the ultimate part that's really causing all the issues, and the person can't get there. Like they just can't allow
Yes.
that voice to come up. How do you
Yes.
work with that?
That's a great question. So first of all, this is it's a kind of like a paradox because if there is a lot of resistance and being stubborn or stubborn parts, right? These are just parts, right? It's a part that feels um that's just kind of reluctant, and there's another part that feels stubborn. But if these parts don't want to do therapy, they're not going to come into therapy, right? Because they're
Mhm.
like, nope, I'm not doing that stuff. It's not for me. I don't need therapy, whatever it is. But then there are clients who come to therapy and still have parts that are reluctant and they come up in therapy. That's when we can do something about it, right? We can help those parts,
Mhm.
right? So when we talk about that, there is hope. The other part of it is another thing when a person don't even want to
Yeah.
to get help, right? But when parts show up in therapy who says no, this is for me, or like I don't want to hear it, I don't want to talk about certain things, what we do in IFS is we say that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
You are welcome here, your feelings are welcome here, your resistance is welcome here, you being stubborn is welcome here. Tell me more about that.
Mhm.
So we offer compassion, we offer curiosity, we offer tenderness.
Yeah.
And these parts are usually very young. They come with a very strong energy, right? They're like, kind of fuck you kind of thing, right? They have a very strong attitude, but they are young. They are usually 10 years old or, 7 years old.
Mm.
And they're like manager parts. So they are just trying to manage your life and protect you from potential pain,
Mm.
because vulnerability can be very, very painful. And it usually was back then at home. Because if you got vulnerable, you open your heart to your parents, they might have shamed you
Mhm.
and told you that you're not good enough, or, I don't want to, don't cry in front of me. So they're just protecting you, and they do the same thing in therapy. But so when we, instead of shaming them, show them compassion,
Mhm.
they usually feel really, really nice and surprised. They're like, what? I'm welcome here?
Mhm.
You don't find my stubbornness irritating?
Mhm.
And they love it. And then they just kind of soften back and they open up and they want to tell me about what's going on and the pain behind the feeling of being stubborn, right? The stubbornness, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So you brought up compassion, and how important is self-compassion in a person healing, them grasping that concept, because so many of those voices that we have are really hard on us, like they're coming from a really judgmental place.
Yes. Yes. 100%. And so we call it the inner critic, the parts of us that can be very kind of like, no, you're not this, you can't do this, who do you think you are? And and these parts, again, they usually come from the family system that we were in. So if you
Mhm.
had a father or a mother or a brother or whoever in the family that was very critical to you and told you these critical things, that you shouldn't think too much of yourself, or so what if you got a good grade, like that's not a big deal, don't be so excited about it, then you're gonna have that energy or that part that becomes almost a part of you. And so it's just trying to do a job. But sometimes what we see in IFS, which is why IFS is so powerful as well, and I guess this also has to do with the spiritual aspect of IFS, is that if this part doesn't belong to you, let's say it's a part that belongs to your father, let's say, and so we can help you to get rid of that energy. If it says, oh, I don't really belong to Selma, I actually belong to Selma's father. I
Mhm.
actually came from there. So then we can say, okay, great. Well, do you want to go back to her father, or do you want to kind of be released into the light? Because you don't have to be here. You're not going to get any resolve by being in Selma's system because you don't even belong to her.
Mm.
And they're usually okay with that
Yeah.
because they don't belong there anyway. And so when we get rid of this energy that doesn't belong to you, you suddenly get clarity. A lot of clients can say this, like, oh, it's like a cloud just, it's just like now the sky is blue and I can see the sky. and I can just think clearly.
Yeah.
Well, no wonder, because there was an energy there that was just like, blocking your view,
Yeah.
quite literally, telling you lies.
Mhm.
Yeah. Does
Is
that make
this
sense?
is this, similar to what people say when they talk about attachments? Or or is it something completely different?
In what way, if you tell me a bit more?
Like when people say they have an attachment, like a spiritual attachment or an
Mhm,
energetic attachment,
mhm.
but the way you explain it, it seems more plausible that it's simply
Well,
a
it could be. I'm not sure about that, but it could be because this is a bit of a spiritual aspect. It's just that
yes.
in IFS, we have proven that this works and it's based on evidence, which is really cool, right?
Mhm.
But absolutely, this has a spiritual aspect to it. So, and there are many different ways. I'm not really familiar with them, but I know that there are some spiritual practices that can help you do a similar thing
Yeah.
where you release energies that don't belong to your body. We have body healing therapies,
Mm.
I guess shamans know how to do certain aspects of this.
Yeah.
Somatic experiencing is another therapeutic form that's very
Mm.
powerful. It's also evidence based.
Mhm.
So there are many ways that we can do this. IFS just has a very kind of clear approach, and we have a structured way of doing that because we literally just ask this energy, like, do you belong to the client's name,
Mhm.
and then it answers like yes or no. And
Yeah.
if it's no, we just, well, can you just leave, please? Kind of.
How long have you
Um,
been
so,
doing this, Selma? Like, how long have you been
approximately 5 years now, I have
uh
been working with IFS. And I got the privilege of getting officially trained in IFS only last year, actually. So,
Wow.
um,
It
yeah,
doesn't feel like it. Working with you, it feels like this is I really feel you came into this space, into this world already with certain components, and you just got the validation for it, you know? Like,
I
I honestly
appreciate
feel that
that.
way, yeah.
Thank
And
you.
you've kind of specialized yourself into a niche. Like, you're pretty open about the
Mhm,
topics that you deal with,
mhm.
but, from what I gather, you're mainly focused on or let's rephrase this. What does societal culture, background have to do with certain aspects of healing in your experience?
That's a
Or
great
trauma?
question. Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great question and such an important one as well. So like absolutely culture has a huge impact on all of us.
Mhm,
And but what I see, especially when it comes to narcissism, and I think all of us, have experienced some form of narcissistic abuse, because narcissistic abuse is just it's such a large category. Any form of abuse can easily come under the form of narcissistic abuse,
mhm,
or narcissists use that type of abuse. And so what I have noticed, even though I've worked with people, from the West or East, it doesn't really matter. Narcissistic abuse is similar or across the world, like we see a similar pattern. However, what we can see though is that, narcissists, they are very creative in their way of abusing, if we can put it that way. So they will use whatever cultural tools they have
mhm,
to kind of use that as a tool to abuse and use that on their victims. So if it's, oh, from my culture, for example, or the religious background that I come from, um, it's religion is used as a tool
mhm,
to control a lot. And like, oh, if you don't do this, then you're going to go to hell, or God will punish you if you wear certain clothes, or like it could be anything that serves the narcissistic parents agenda.
yeah,
And so absolutely they can use these different tools from culture, society, so wherever they are located, so to say, they will use everything they can to do that and to hurt people. So in that sense, I would say that I can see that there's a bit of a difference, but at the same time, abuse is still abuse. So it doesn't really matter. Essentially, we're still talking about the same damage that it creates in people. People across the world still have the same symptoms, of abuse. It's just anxiety, depression, maybe suicidal thoughts or nightmares or eating disorders, addictions of all sorts,
Yeah.
getting involved with toxic people. So that's all the same.
'Cause I stumbled across your Instagram, and that's how
Mm.
we met.
Yes.
And your Instagram posts are so like, they just keep nailing it and nailing it and nailing it and nailing it. And I remember there was one post where you brought up the difficulties around coming from an immigrant family and being in the toxic parental situation, and how that just compounds
Oh,
everything. I
yes.
thought, "Oh my gosh, I've never heard
100%.
anyone speak on this." But
Yes.
I of course, I've seen it, and I've seen it now in many families. Not only do they battle the generational gap on top of the
Mhm.
family toxicity, but also the cultural gap when the children are
Yes.
raised in one culture, but the parents come from a different culture, and how
Yes.
that's completely
Yeah.
used against them as well. Yeah.
That's a really good point, actually, and I guess I can share a little bit about of how my journey has been on that. Great point. I think you're right. We don't talk about this too, like as much as we should,
Mhm.
because I grew up in. So I'm born and brought up in Sweden, right?
Yes.
And Sweden, for those of you who don't know, it's like very, open society. It's a very free society. Women are, they can be self-sufficient and they get to wear whatever they want. It's a typical Western, I guess, society, you could say, in many ways. So freedom is a thing in Sweden, but I grew up in a home where we had where I didn't have that mentality, or we didn't. My parents didn't have that mentality. So I grew up in a Muslim household, and this is not to speak of the religion at all. This has
No,
nothing to do with that.
nothing to do with
It's
that.
just that whatever I was told was okay. You can't wear this or those clothes, and you can't behave this way. You're a girl, so you will have a lot of kind of restrictions, so there's a lot of like kind of unfair things that I had to face. Whereas outside, I was going in the society and in school where all the other Swedish girls got to do whatever they wanted, and they got to party maybe and have boyfriends, etc. But I couldn't do that. And so it was very confusing for me because I thought, but then who am I? And so
Mhm.
I had to kind of split into many different parts,
Yeah,
right? So one part that has to kind of adapt somehow and make sense of being in school where all the things that's not acceptable at home is acceptable
mhm.
outside. And so it becomes very confusing. And of course, narcissistic parents, they take advantage of that full on
Yeah.
because they're like, great, now I'm going to push on that and confuse you even more,
Mhm.
and gaslight you and say, oh, there's something wrong with you,
Yeah.
right? Not us. But you are the problem. Your thinking is the problem. Your attitude is the problem. If you
Mhm.
could only fix this or be a little bit more like that, then we would be nicer to you,
Mhm.
right? And so it just creates so much isolation, I would say, because you can't go out there and explain what's happening at home.
No. Yeah.
You look different as well, right? You have
Yes.
black hair and everyone are blonde. So you're already feeling that as a child, like, am I different?
Mhm.
And it becomes very isolating, I would say. Because who do you speak to about this? How are they supposed to understand
And
the cultural
teachers
background?
teachers aren't equipped, and even guidance school
Absolutely not.
counselors or all of that, they're not equipped to do
Not at all.
because nobody talks about that. But
No,
I hope people start through your work as well, speaking more and more on it because there are more and more
yes,
refugees and immigrants in the world every day. So
absolutely.
it's going to become a topic. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Has to.
No, it is. It's such an important topic because I felt, so many times I wanted to speak to my Swedish friends about things, and I tried, but then they go into, and it might not be intentional, but they go into kind of shaming responses, almost like,
Yes.
oh, you're not
Judgment.
allowed to do that, or like,
Yeah.
oh, that's kind of weird because my parents let me do what, and it becomes, oh, then it's me. There's something about me, and that's the perpetuate kind of gaslighting
Yeah.
of there's something about me, and it
Yeah.
increases the self-doubt, increases the trauma, increases the split. So then it's like, let's be
Absolutely.
silent out there, let's be silent at home.
Yeah.
Where is my voice?
Where's my voice? And where's my place?
Where do I belong?
Where do I belong?
So it's very sad, I would say. It's heartbreaking, really, for
Mhm.
those who cannot really find their
Mm.
community or their people.
Yeah.
And so we really need to offer space
Yeah.
for that.
And
Yeah.
I was thinking as well as you were
Mm.
speaking how again, won't like the greatest healers go through the deepest trauma for whatever reason. It's like that has to be an initiatory fire to bring out the healing capacity or something. I don't know.
Yes. It's like wounded healers.
Yes.
It's a saying. I don't know who had said it, but that I love that saying. We are wounded healers.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So, what are some signs of progress when you've been working with a client for a while? As in, how long does it take, and when do you notice, oh, okay, they're doing a lot better now?
Yeah. That's a great question. And so it's always different for everyone, I would
Mhm.
say. And the funny thing is that there are a lot of clients who sometimes months of working together might say like, oh, but I'm not kind of noticing differences
Yes.
until, and this is so much fun, so until they get into a situation from the past. So maybe they went out traveling, for example, and now they're noticing that they're feeling really confident and calm.
Mhm.
And in the past, when they were traveling, they felt really anxious, like super anxious. And they're like, oh my God, I don't know. I'm so overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. And that's when they notice, like, wait a minute, why am I so confident? Why am I so calm all of a sudden? That's kind of weird. I'm supposed to be anxious right now. And
Mhm.
so sometimes changes can happen like that, and you can see it in that way.
Yeah.
And other times changes can be pretty significant. Sometimes clients can just after a couple of sessions or maybe a month or two,
Mhm.
have major significant realizations that, oh my God, I'm not happy in my marriage.
Right.
Or, like
Yeah.
I'm kind of seeing patterns in my partner that's similar to what my parents used to do with me. Like I'm not feeling emotionally safe. And I don't feel good with that anymore. I'm not okay with that anymore. And suddenly they speak up to their partner
Mm.
that they might have never done for 15 years, let's say. That's huge, right? That's a huge shift
Mhm.
internally. So these shifts happens because again, if you don't listen to the parts of you, then who is going to listen to them,
Right.
right? They're constantly going to be disowned and they're just going to be in there just waiting for their turn or waiting for someone to listen. But once you begin to listen, tell me about your anger, tell me about your frustration, tell me about your sadness, then you know. And then when you go out in the world, you're gonna kind of have that connection with your parts and be like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to let you shut down my sadness. I am sad, and that's okay. And I want to express my sadness now. I'm not going to shut it down anymore. And so then the other person needs to decide, what do I do with this? This is
Yes.
different,
Yeah.
right? I'm not used to my partner, expressing their sadness in this way or expressing anger for that matter. Do I welcome this or do I run? Right? Or do I grow together with my partner? So that's up to them to decide, and for the client, of course. So these are changes, and then we have other changes that can happen. Is I
What are
had
some of
one.
the
Yes.
difficulties or the challenges that clients face during this? Because you're already sketching some of the challenges that it might seem to get worse before it gets better. But
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember one client who, so and even I have had some parts of me and the therapist came up of self-doubt or a doubtful part, like, am I doing the right thing? Because we have parts too, right? And they come up in therapy all the time, and we go to our therapist and work with our parts. But so there was this one client who, for months, we were working together, and it was very slow, right? It was a lot of kind of long silences, which it can be common for some clients, but for this particular client, it was quite significant.
Mhm.
And we waited and waited and waited to get a response, and we got a response. But so the client said, I'm not really, I'm not really feeling any changes, and I'm not really feeling like something's happening. But then, boom, suddenly, after, I think 3 or 4 months or so, suddenly the answers begin to come faster. The
Mhm.
silences are much kind of shorter, and the parts are now speaking to the client much clearly. And she's kind of noticing, oh my God, I'm having a much stronger connection with them.
Mhm.
I'm starting to sense my feelings, parts, feelings, same thing. I'm starting to sense my feelings now. And she's out and about, in her relationship, at work. Oh my God, I'm noticing my angry part is getting activated now at work. I didn't like what my boss just said. That's interesting. I can offer compassion to my angry part right now rather than in previous situation, I'm just feeling so angry, I'm so anxious, I don't know what to do, my boss just said this, I'm so triggered.
Yeah.
That's a very different place than being, oh my God, a part of me feels angry and triggered right now because of what my boss did. Let me show it some compassion here. Let me acknowledge, I get that you feel angry.
Mhm.
It makes sense to me, right? And I'm here for you, and I'm just offering you some compassion. Maybe you can tell me more about it when we get home. Stuff like that is, it sounds small, but it creates major shifts, because
Mhm.
then your whole day you don't have to sit in anger and anxiety and then go home and still not know what to do with the anxiety, and then the next day go back to work with anxiety. Now you can separate yourself from the anxiety and listen to it.
Mhm. And
So
maybe change jobs.
yeah, that's true too. Absolutely.
Change jobs, yeah.
That's right.
My goodness. So how do you, what about re-traumatization? Because some people are afraid to have these emotions come up and they kind of block them. And because
Mhm.
they're like, I can't go there anymore. And you're like, we kind of have to go there because you buried the pearl down there that we have to dig up. And they're like, no, we're not going to do it. How
Yes.
do you deal with that, with this fear of re-traumatization? Or have
Yeah.
clients been re-traumatized through them going through this experience?
I sure hope not in my sessions.
I doubt it, but
But no, it's an important question as well. So re-traumatization happens if we relive the trauma, if the client relives the trauma. So that's what happens in exposure therapy, for example. Not a good form of therapy. I do not recommend that.
yeah, no.
Exposure therapy, oh, let's talk about the trauma. Let's feel the trauma. Let's relive it, feel it in the body. It's too much. The nervous system can't handle that. And
Mm,
it doesn't do anything other than make you feel even worse, and more terrified. Not a good idea.
okay.
So why IFS is so powerful is because, again, if a part says no, I'm not going there, and I'm not gonna let you get near that Pandora's box, right? That's my territory, and you ain't getting there. We listen to the part and we say, I respect that. That's totally fine. We don't have to go anywhere. And then we say, in fact, tell me more about your job. Sounds like you're doing a really important job
Mhm.
because you're protecting something, big in there. And I am all ears. Tell me more about it. And the part will tell you, well, I've been doing this job since I was 9 years old,
Yeah.
right? And, this is what I do. I don't let anyone near uh, that vulnerability or that pain or that sadness or that shame. Um, and we have these questions that we ask this part. Okay, how long have you been doing that job? What was it that happened back then that made you take on this role in the first place? Would you like some help? Do you need something? Do you know how old the client is? Because you're 9, but do you know how old the client is? And they usually have no idea. They think that the client is a child, right? So when they find out, oh, Sarah, let's say, is actually 40, I didn't know that. That's interesting. And then they start getting curious about the client's adult self. And then we have a connection between a 9-year-old part and the adult self. And so that's where the magic happens. So it's not about the therapist, right? Tell me about like, let's dig into the traumas. We're
Yes.
just sitting there as guides. We want the client to show curiosity to that part who says, no, you're not going there.
Mhm.
That's our job in IFS. So if the client gets curious, everything shifts.
Right. That's awesome. Is there an age limit, or can you work with children with this, or is it only for adults?
Oh, it would be wonderful to work with children. And
Okay.
it's there's a podcast also I can recommend if there are
Mhm.
parents listening. I did recommend it recently to one of my clients who's a parent. IFS has a podcast. I think it's called IFS Podcast, if I'm not incorrect. But Google that. Otherwise, it's a beautiful podcast where a lot of IFS therapists actually speak of how we can incorporate IFS therapy, or rather the IFS philosophy, and invite children to speak to us about their parts. Like,
Right.
I have a part that's angry, mommy, or like, I have a part that's really sad right now. And they can, draw their parts
Mhm.
to express their feelings rather than just, talking from I'm really angry.
Yeah.
That's different. That's just right. So there's a lot of aspects in these episodes that are amazing for parents. I would highly recommend people check that out. However, I don't really work with children as
Mhm.
such because I don't have experience with that. But yes, there are IFS therapists out there that focus on children and
Children.
adolescents.
Awesome. Is that a form of disassociation though, to say like I'm speaking of an aspect of myself in the third voice or the third person and
Not
disconnecting from.
necessarily, no.
Okay.
Because if you can say, "Oh, a part of me feels like this,"
Mhm.
that means you're observing, right? You're
Right.
noticing that there is a part, and that means you have awareness.
Mhm.
So you're in the observing self, which is a good thing. And if you say, "I'm curious why that part of me gets so pissed off every single time I'm at the airport, let's say, or
Yeah.
whatever, or every time that person looks at me that certain way." If you can get curious, that means you are in your core self.
Yeah.
And the core self is the only thing in your system that's not a part. That's your core.
Mhm.
Everything else is a part. But your core, your curiosity, your compassion, your courage, your connectedness, your clarity, right? Your confidence, that's your core self. And that's what we want to kind of increase
Yeah.
in the client. We want to give more access to that and expand that area of the brain so that you can live from there much more than live from parts and be hijacked by all these feelings. We don't want you to kind of necessarily be so hijacked by them.
Right. So the core is the unchangeable, eternal part of you that
Yeah, we
you didn't
call it the
create
inner
yourself. That's
wisdom.
what you
You
came
can, sorry, go on.
that you didn't create yourself. That's what you came in with.
Exactly. Yeah. So Dr. Schwartz, who is the
Mhm.
founder of IFS, speaks of this, and he means that everyone is kind of born with a self that's in us, that's unbreakable, or just it cannot be damaged. No
Yes.
matter how much trauma you have been through, it doesn't matter what you've been through, the self is still in there, and it's whole and it's complete. And it's just our job is for clients to access that self,
Mhm.
but it can take years sometimes to, excuse me, to do that,
Right.
depending on how much trauma you have.
Is there any contraindication to working like this? Like, is there some, I don't know, if people are on medication, mind altering medication, mood altering medication, is that,
Um,
would that
yeah,
be?
I would say that we need to be careful, and we need to kind of do a background check with clients, and
Mhm.
um, get curious about what medications they're under currently and how that's affecting their, their sleep, their thinking, and their day-to-day life, and be mindful of that. However, I'm not a doctor, so obviously I can't really have an opinion
Right.
on that specifically.
Mhm.
However, from my experience working with clients who've been on antidepressants, maybe, or anxiety meds, and stuff like that,
Mhm.
I see that as beneficial because it's kind of it kind of helps the brain to find a sense of calm, because that's what antidepressants at least can do. It's almost like they help the brain to stop sending that signal of you're in danger, you're in danger, you're in danger, and it calms that signal temporarily. And then you can be like, oh, okay, now I'm not feeling so anxious anymore. And in combination with trauma therapy, it can do wonders so that your brain doesn't have to be so hyper vigilant all the time and in fight or flight response, because that's what trauma does, right? It
Mhm.
makes us live in a place that belongs to the past. We're not in the present. The present moment is stolen from us, and we want to give that back to
Back.
clients.
Yes, yes. Are there clients that you do not take on as that
Narcissist.
are yeah.
That's a personal, I would say, preference, I would say, for sure. And that's work for me to do 100%. And I'm doing the work and I'm going to do the work for the rest of my life. But I do have parts that definitely gets activated when it comes to, I mean, narcissists don't come to therapy. That's one thing, right?
Yeah.
But we can see clients who have severely narcissistic parts, right? So they do have maybe 40% of their system
Yeah.
wants to heal and wants to grow, but then they might be blended and hijacked with narcissistic parts that can be very critical and say, I don't believe in this treatment,
Yes.
or,
Yeah.
this is ridiculous, or they kind of tend to pick at the therapist because they don't want to focus on the vulnerability.
Yeah.
So any focus off of me as an off of the client and focusing on the therapist. So I would say, again, therapists have to do that work, the
Mhm.
healing work internally, in order to be able to sit with those kinds of clients. And I am owning that I have work left to do when it comes to that.
So do
So
I.
yeah,
I just
100%. So I guess,
don't have the patience. I just don't. I don't.
yeah, like I have parts that get quite triggered with
Yeah.
that, and can shut down, and that's not helpful for neither me or nor the client. So,
Right.
but luckily, I don't get much of those clients. I would say I get many more of those who just, who want to heal, and I guess, yeah, like who don't have the narcissistic aspects
Mhm.
in their system. So I get that aligns with my energy,
So
I guess.
what's next for Selma? What's coming up next for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I'm aiming for my IFS level 2 training. That's my goal and my dream to get into IFS level 2. I
Mhm.
also want to aim for IFS level 3 training, which is the highest training that you can get. Continue to do healing work, of course, with my IFS therapist, who is genius and a brilliant therapist. And definitely expand, continue to educate people on narcissism, and specifically narcissistic mothers is what I focus on.
Yes.
And yeah, I think that's for now, that's where I'm headed towards, I would say. It's a lot of work, and then I'm just loving working with clients as well on a daily basis. That's just the best part of my work, I would say,
That's
by
awesome.
far.
I am so happy you do what you do and that there are methods of healing and that
Yes,
we're not stuck in the trauma cycle if we don't want to be. There are ways out of it. There's a full life to be lived. And
100%.
yeah, I'm so happy that you're
There
on
is
that
hope.
path. Yes.
Yes, there is hope and there is help.
Mhm.
And I really want people to hear this. Like there is hope. There is help to get, and these therapies. It's not just IFS and sensory motor. Even like I said, EMDR is fantastic
Mhm.
to heal trauma. Somatic therapies are fantastic
Yeah.
to heal trauma. So, definitely never give up. You just need to find the right therapist who understands you,
Mhm.
and trust your instincts here. If it feels wrong, it's wrong. Switch, change therapists. You have the right
Yeah.
to feel safe with your therapist. You need to feel safe with your
Yes.
therapist. That's kind of the point. So
Right. Yeah.
trust yourself there,
Mhm.
and don't hesitate to question their credentials if you need to, and ask them about their background, and do they know of the traumas and the pain that you have specifically. Maybe you've gone through some, narcissistic abuse, for example, or addictions, or, alcoholism in the family. Maybe you want a therapist who really understands that. Then, yes, go for that.
And is there a way for people to find an IFS therapist in their location or vicinity in case they're
Yes.
saying, okay, we'd love to work with you, but we want somebody
Yeah.
in person right next to me?
Absolutely, great question. So you can search for IFS therapist directory,
Mhm.
and there you will find all the therapists across the world who are trained in IFS. And they have a pretty great function of like search function. So you can search by country, you can search if you want online therapists or in person
Mhm.
therapists. So we don't have enough IFS therapists today, unfortunately, but there are a lot of them. So if you're lucky, you might find someone in person in your area.
Most of them have a background in psychology as well, right? Or psychiatry?
I couldn't answer that actually.
Okay.
I wouldn't know, but yeah, I would say many of them do for
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Selma, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for sharing this with us and sharing your background story a little bit and your take on all of this and offering hope. I think that is so underestimated nowadays
Yes,
in this
absolutely.
capitalist, fast-paced culture that we all tend to, yeah,
Oh, yes, yes,
we
absolutely.
forget that
No,
there's
but
hope.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Yes.
I'm just so happy to get this opportunity to talk
Thank
about
you.
this. Such an important topic.
Well, you have helped me significantly. I can honestly
Thank
say
you.
that. And if
I
you
appreciate
didn't, we
that.
wouldn't be having this because there would be nothing for me
Yeah,
to, you know,
yeah,
move on.
absolutely.
So it's
Definitely kind of brings up curiosity as well. Yeah.
yes, absolutely wonderful work. And I hope you keep doing what you do. Yeah.
Thank you. You too, Carleen. Great work. I'm so
Selma.
happy. Hope that your audience find value in this.
Yes, I hope so too.
Yeah,
Thank you
100%.
so much, Selma.
Thank you. Thank you.